Okay, so this is Chris White. I am the Vice Chair of the 2020 Economic Development and Housing Commission, and I am calling this meeting to order. As a reminder to folks, pursuant to the Governor's executive order, we are members of the Commission and the staff are meeting remotely to reduce the spread of COVID-19. And members of the public can watch the Commission meeting on Wave Cable Channel 20 or live streaming through the City of West Sacramento's website. If you'd like to submit a comment in writing, please mail the Commission clerk and write public comment in the subject line. The body of the email needs to include the item number and the title of the item, as well as your comments. Comments needed to be received by 5 p.m. to be provided to the commissioners and posted on the website. Comments submitted shall become part of the public record of this meeting. To make a verbal comment during the meeting, join the meeting using the Zoom meeting link, which is posted on the city's website and in the meeting agenda. The chair will request public comment during item 1A prior to the first consent item on the agenda. Once the chair has announced the public comment period, if you'd like to make a comment, please do one of the following. If you're joining the meeting by Zoom, press the raise hand button. Or if you're joining by phone, press *9. When it's your turn to comment, the chair or clerk will call you by name and phone number, and city staff will unmute your microphone. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. Once your public comment has ended, your microphone will be muted again. And so with that, Commission Clerk, would you like to do a roll call?
Thank you. After I call your name, if you're here, just say present, please. Commissioner Dawson?
Present.
Commissioner Guerra?
Present.
Commissioner Kim?
Present.
Commissioner Olson?
Present.
Commissioner Singh?
Present.
And Commissioner Thornton?
Present.
We have a quorum. Thank you.
Thank you. And this is Commissioner White. I already said myself, but I'm here as well. So on item 1A, presentations by the public on matter, do we have any presentations from the public? Please raise your hand or press *9 on your phone to be recognized. Hearing none. I'm sorry, Commissioner Clerk, please go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I was going to say we did not receive any comments in writing either.
Thank you. So we will move on to item 1B, which is swearing in of the Economic Development and Housing Commission members.
Thank you. After the oath is read, when your name is called, please respond with either I do or I agree. Do you solemnly swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California, that you will take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which you are about to enter? Commissioner Dawson?
I do.
Commissioner Guerra?
I do.
Commissioner Kim?
I do.
Commissioner Olson?
I do.
Commissioner Singh?
I do.
Commissioner Thornton?
I do.
And Commissioner White?
I do.
Thank you, and congratulations to the new commissioners.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now we're moving on to item 1C, which is the election of commission chair and vice chair. I'm just steering the ship until we pick a new captain. I would like to remind each one of the commission members that we have folks who are maybe listening by phone and don't see your face. So it's a great idea to state your name as you nominate someone so that we can record it in the record, and the folks that are participating by phone can know who's saying what. So with that, do we have a nomination for chair and vice chair?
I would like to nominate, this is Commissioner Olson. I would like to nominate Commissioner Chris White as chair.
This is JP Singh. I vote the name of Chris White for chair.
Thank you very much. Do we have a nomination for vice chair? May I put forward Commissioner Olson, who has also previously served on EDH, as the nomination for vice chair?
I second it.
Any other recommendations? Okay, nominations are closed. Do I have a move to accept the recommendations of Commissioners White and Olson as chair and vice chair? And please state your name when you say I move.
This is JP Singh. I move.
And do we have a second?
This is
I
Andrew.
second.
Second.
State your name and then say a second, please.
This is Andrew. I second.
Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any
Aye.
opposed? All right, the motion passes. And Commission Clerk, do we need to do roll call of the members for voting?
I will do a roll call vote. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Commissioner Dawson,
Yes.
Commissioner Guerra,
Yes.
Commissioner Kim,
Yes.
Commissioner Olson,
Yes.
Commissioner Singh,
Yes.
Commissioner Thornton,
Yes.
and Commissioner White.
Yes.
Thank you.
Right, the motion passes. On to item 1D, welcome statement from the Economic Development and Housing staff.
Yes, good evening, Commissioners. Congratulations to Commissioner White and Commissioner Olson for your appointments this evening. Madam Chair, my name is Raul Huerta, as many of you already know. I'm the Housing Manager in the Economic Development and Housing Department. Our Director, Katie Jacobson, was unfortunately unable to join us today, but we do want to welcome everybody once again and thank each and one of you for serving in the Economic Development and Housing Commission. We look forward to working with you and receiving feedback on future policy-related matters within the purview of this commission. So again, thank you and for everybody joining us this evening. Before we move on, I do want to just provide a brief summary of the composition of our department. The department is comprised of 3 divisions. The first division is community investment, which is led by Katie Yancey, our community investment manager. The second division is economic development. That is led by Diane Richards, our economic development manager. And the third division is housing, which is led by myself as the housing manager. The rest of the staff is comprised of Amber Siasit, who's our administrative analyst, Larry Lee, who is our parking manager, Fred Arnold, our real estate manager, Elijah Ortega, who's our community investment specialist, Isaiah Alford, another one of our community investment specialists who will be presenting tonight. And one of our newest members is Nuvi Saldana, who is our secretary. As we bring items to the commission, you'll be able to meet the rest of the staff. That concludes my welcome. And again, thank you everybody for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Huerta. On to our consent agenda. And a consent agenda is not items we necessarily review or have a report about, but things that we all read in advance. And this is your opportunity to say, I disagree with any portion of this, or I found an error in the minutes. So are there any items to note on the consent agenda? Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? And please state your name when you move.
Commissioner Olson, I move to approve.
And a second, please.
This is Andrew. I second.
All right, and Commission Clerk, will you do a roll call vote, please?
Thank you. Commissioner Dawson,
Here.
Commissioner Guerra,
Yes.
Commissioner Kim,
Yes.
Commissioner Olson,
Yes.
Commissioner Singh,
Yes.
Commissioner Thornton,
Yes.
and Commissioner White.
Yes.
Thank you.
Now we are moving on to our regular agenda, and our first item is to talk about the Community Development Block Grant, CDBG, an acronym I have struggled with for years. This will not be your only opportunity to learn or talk about CDBG. This is an area that we deal with a lot within our commission. It is federal funding that we, as the city staff, really implement to take care of problems. I shouldn't say problems, to advance the goals of the city. The one thing I would advise you as commissioners that I learned is to really understand the parameters of this grant money, because it can't just be spent on anything we want to spend it on. It has certain things that we need to do. And over the time that you're on the commission, you'll hear from members of the public about certain things. We should do this with the money and we should do that with the money. And it really helps to know the parameters for the money. And so with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Alford, who will probably say exactly what I said.
Madam Chair, I do want to, before Isaiah makes his presentation, I do want to introduce Isaiah. As I mentioned, he's also a newer member of our staff. Isaiah has been with our department for about 9 months now. He is still learning the ropes of CDBG, and as he noted, it's a very complex program, but he's doing a tremendous job in learning the ins and outs of CDBG. So with that, I'll turn it over to Isaiah for the presentation this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Raul, for the introduction. I'll be sharing my screen now. It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay, Isaiah, it should work now.
Okay. Can you see my screen? Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Good evening, members of the EDH Commission. My name is Isaiah Alford, and I am the Community Investment Specialist in the Economic Development and Housing Department. Today, I'll be presenting a brief summary of the Community Development Block Grant Program and reviewing the new CDBG 5-year consolidated plan and the 2021 annual action plan. In 2016, the city of West Sacramento became an entitlement jurisdiction, which enabled the city to receive funding directly from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. A requirement of the CDBG program is to develop a consolidated plan, which must occur every 5 years. The 5-year consolidated plan must examine the needs of low-income persons and neighborhoods. CDBG funds must be used to address one of 3 national objectives. The city must develop an annual action plan that allocates CDBG funds for activities to achieve goals in the 5-year consolidated plan. The first national objective benefits low and moderate income individuals. The second is the prevention or elimination of slums and blights. The third national objective is an urgent need, which is something unexpected, such as tornadoes or a flood. National objectives were used to establish goals from the current consolidated plan. It is important to note that 70% of the jurisdiction's allocations must be used to benefit low to moderate income individuals. The CDBG program is a flexible funding source which allows entitlement jurisdictions to use the money for a wide range of activities. These activities can be acquisition and rehab of affordable housing, construction and rehab of public facilities and public infrastructure. Economic development activities are also eligible for assistance under the CDBG program. Activities can also include homeless, youth, and senior programs. Any service activities are capped at 15% of the total allocation for any given year. The goals for the current consolidated plan sought to reduce the incidence and impact of homelessness, achieve goals in the HUD Challenge Grant Washington Realize, strengthen economic opportunities for lower income households, affirmatively further fair housing compliance too. All goals are planned through activities that fulfilled at least one of 3 national objectives. The city committed 2017 and 2018 CDBG allocations totaling just over $1 million to support the development of a permanent supportive housing project. This project is scheduled to construct 85 housing units that will specifically target homeless individuals with a serious mental illness or those at risk of chronic homelessness. This project is anticipated to be completed in the third quarter of 2021. In 2016, over $443,000 was allocated for design improvements to a section of the Riverwalk Trail, which connects to I Street Bridge. In 2019 and 2020, the city allocated over $766,000 towards E&F Street improvements. The objective of the project was to improve pedestrian safety and accessibility, as well as address complaints regarding sidewalk improvements for the disabled. Both activities achieved the goal for Washington District's Sustainable Community Infrastructure Project. In 2019, $60,000 was allocated to fund a microenterprise technical assistance program for low to moderate income individuals owning or working towards developing a small business in West Sacramento. The microenterprise technical assistance program will provide a series of business development workshops, in addition to individual business and financial counseling. Fair housing services have been funded $21,000 every year of the current consolidated plan. Fair housing education and counseling was provided to low to moderate income individuals. Multi-family complexes were tested for compliance with fair housing law. The city is in its last year of the current consolidated plan. As a result, staff began working on the development of the new 5-year consolidated plan in late 2020. Included in the staff report is a brief summary of several studies we thought are valuable in considering selection for goals of the new consolidated plan. The first being the housing element of the general plan, which contains goals and policies that provide key housing issues in West Sacramento. Additionally is an analysis of impediments, which is a planning process for local governments and public housing agencies to survey to take meaningful actions to overcome historic patterns of segregation, promote fair housing choice, and foster inclusive communities that are free from discrimination. And the last planning document was the Washington Realize, which focused specifically on the urban structure and design, infrastructure, affordable housing, transportation, recreation and historic preservation, and land use. The policy and data gathered from these 3 big planning documents were utilized in development of the new 5-year consolidated plan goals. In addition to review of the planning documents and other data, public workshops were conducted before the Economic Development and Housing Commission and the Parks, Recreation, and Intergenerational Service Commission. A public hearing was also presented before the City Council to take public comments and to provide the public with an overview of the CDBG funding. Lastly, staff with the assistance from our consultant conducted public outreach by holding 4 virtual stakeholder focus group meetings. Participants of the affordable housing and homelessness noted the disparity between income and the cost of rent. Participants in the youth focus group emphasized the barriers to housing for youth with insufficient income and lack of rental history to secure a rental unit. In the seniors and disability focus group, participants confirmed that the Social Security income was not enough to rent a 1-bedroom unit in Yolo County, and there's a lack of accessible units for the disabled. And the last focus group was employment and small businesses. And this discussion presented a need for technical assistance and supportive services. Individual interviews were also held with the city's homeless service coordinator and Alta California Regional Center. The homeless coordinator emphasized that people experiencing homelessness in West Sacramento face many barriers to housing. These barriers included not having sufficient income to meet landlord requirements or poor credit and rental histories. The director emphasized that Alta California Regional Center would like to partner with the city to work towards development of low-cost apartments for the city's underhoused population of adults with developmental needs. After review of documents and public outreach, staff is recommending the following goals for the new 5-year consolidated plan. You will notice that the goals on this slide are more specific from those in the staff report. However, the objective is the same. Goal number 1 addresses homelessness, which has been its key focus in the council's strategic plan for the past 5 years. Goal number 2 also addresses homelessness by creating housing opportunities. Goal number 3 is to provide infrastructure improvements in neighborhoods suffering from disinvestment. Goal number 4 is to provide fair housing education and counseling services to low and moderate income residents and households and landlords. Sorry about that. And goal number 5 is to support small businesses by strengthening economic opportunities for small businesses and employment. And the last goal was goal number 6 is the preservation of affordable housing stock to provide housing rehab funding for single family units. Staff received initial direction to use CDBG primarily for capital improvement projects to benefit low to moderate income residents and in support of affordable housing. For the first year allocation of the new consolidated plan, staff is recommending the following activities for funding. The ENF Street project will address infrastructure deficiencies within the Washington neighborhood by completing disconnected sidewalk and street crossing networks to support connectivity to the public transportation and riverfront trails. General administration funding will be used for program administration activities, including reporting to HUD, conducting environmental review of CDBG funding projects, and planning activities such as the consolidated plan and the annual action plan. These funding allocations support the recommended goals. This concludes my presentation. I want to remind the Commission that staff is recommending the Commission take a vote to recommend that the Council approves the draft 2021 to 2025 Consolidated Plan and the 2021 Annual Action Plan. Thank you for your time. Our consultant, Luis Callis, Raul, and myself are open for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Alford. Lovely, great presentation. Good job on your first one. And we're going to take some questions from the commissioners. And I see that Commissioner Kim posted one in the chat. And Commissioner Kim, because we have people who may be listening, I'm going to ask if you would read your question aloud, please.
Thank you, Commissioner White, or Chairperson White. This is Commissioner Kim. A question as a new commissioner, how the Washington district or neighborhood was initially chosen in the first a 5-year consolidated plan as the second goal. And I say this in the context of, I already realized that in the next rendition, you're going to build upon Washington District, which makes a lot of sense because as a real estate developer myself, there's a lot of benefit of being able to build out from the infrastructure that you're already doing. But my curiosity as a new commissioner is to understand how was the Washington District or neighborhood chosen over other neighborhoods? Was that a study that said that this neighborhood more than any other neighborhood was in the most trouble? Or was it a political process with the council members who contributed or weighed in? Or how was that neighborhood specifically chosen?
That's a great question. At this time, I would hope that Raul or Luis can better assist you with answering this question. Just because it was developed in the first consolidated plan, and I would just like to have more assistance with answering this question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, definitely. I see it. Not a problem. Thank you, Commissioner Kim, for your question. I would say that it's a combination of everything that you noted. A few years ago, the city conducted a very comprehensive study of the Washington neighborhood called Washington Realized. And our consultant, Louise Collis, who at the time was one of our staff, was one of the leading staff who undertook that study. There was significant community outreach regarding the needs of Washington as an area of the city that had been, for many years, been neglected, or at least that's how the residents felt that it had been neglected. So the study was conducted to see what were the major needs in that neighborhood. And that was one of the driving factors for considering the Washington neighborhood as one of the goals in the initial 5-year consolidated plan. As we're doing now, the goals were presented to the Housing Commission, our Parks Commission, and ultimately the council, who are the ones who decide to formally approve the plan for submittal to HUD. So it was a combination of everything that you mentioned, that very comprehensive study that was done, and input that we received throughout the planning process for that first year, 5-year consolidated plan. And I know Louise is with us as well, so she can probably elaborate a lot more on that Washington Realized study.
Raul, do you mind if I could jump in, and maybe Luis
Sure.
needs to answer too? So it seems like, so the impetus was this study, but was this Washington study just already only focused on Washington, or was it focused more comprehensively? Like, here's the city of Sacramento, and then here all are the neighborhoods that are considered in need of assistance. And then from there, like choosing Washington and then focusing on improving Washington? Or was it the entire study was just focused on Washington, and from that, it going into the 5-year consolidated plan? That's the part that's unclear.
Correct.
I'm happy to answer that if you'd like.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Louise.
Okay, so you guys can hear me?
Yes.
All right. I'm Louise Collis. I was a city employee for 14 years in West Sacramento. And I retired a few years ago, but I'm doing some consulting here and there. And I was working along with Raul and Isaiah on the consolidated plan this year. And I also worked on the first one 5 years ago. That's a really good question, Commissioner Kim, about why Washington was selected. A number of years ago, and I'm trying to think of how many years ago it would be now, probably at least 10, it was identified that the Washington neighborhood as a location was prime for infill development. And we were really trying to encourage infill development to balance out the greenfield development going on, for example, in Southport. And to also capitalize on, the fact that it is just a bridge away from all of the economic development that happens in downtown Sacramento. So the problem was that infrastructure in Washington could not support development. It was very difficult. The city, more than 10 years, for many, many years before that, tried to get developers to come in and look, and they had a difficult time because we didn't even have a good understanding of the infrastructure in Washington because it was so old, and what it would take to upgrade it to meet the city's general plan. So the zoning to upzone those areas for high density development, which is what we were trying to target, high density infill. We needed to know what infrastructure improvements were going to be required: the water, the sewer, the streets, the transit, the parks, the schools. What all this was going to take, and try and get our hands around a little bit of an idea of the cost. And so that's how Washington was selected. We had a problem area that could potentially turn into a huge benefit for the city, but it had these issues that we needed to look at and evaluate. So we applied for and received a HUD grant called a Community Strategy Grant. I think this was a number of years ago. I'm straining my brain here to remember the name. It had a long title. And that matched with city money produced the Washington Realized study. In addition to looking at the infrastructure, in addition to looking at what upzoning would look like, that strategy also included an analysis of what was going to be required to avoid hurting the people that live there currently, because it's a very low income neighborhood. It's changing. It's changing with the development that's going on right now. But we wanted to make sure that the people that were living there previously were not hurt by gentrification and forced out of their neighborhood that they lived in. So the strategy included an anti-displacement evaluation. It included an evaluation of how we can support our small businesses that were there at the time. And so it was very, very comprehensive. And that, because we had done that, the city was able to get several more grants, multi-million-dollar grants that started putting in infrastructure. So you've probably seen that there's new streets in Washington. There's new bike lanes. There's been development. And we've started to see that the fact that we have that data, we know where the problem infrastructure is, but we also have identified what it's going to take to improve it. It takes some of the questions away. It takes away some of the uncertainty, which makes developers a whole lot more interested. So, we have the new apartments along that into West Capitol Avenue, just across from Raleigh Field. And now we have CalSTRS building their second building. And then of course we have all the little restaurants and things that are up at the end of, Raul, correct me, is that C Street? I forgot.
Correct. Yeah, Third and C. Third and C.
Yes.
So
Yes.
Burgers and Brew.
So a lot of the improvements that have been done with grant money that we leveraged by having this study, and we could bring this study with us, use the data from it to apply for grant funding, is starting to pay off. The new C Street Bridge, that's going to replace the I Street Bridge, was also considered under this study. Some of the infrastructure that would be required to handle traffic patterns that we're going to change. All of that was a part of that study. And the reason to put our CDBG money in that in the first 5 years of our consolidated plan was to leverage all of these other resources to keep the momentum going in that neighborhood. Now, the new con plan, the proposed one that draft that's before you this evening, expands that a little bit beyond Washington. It has the goal for infrastructure now is also expanded to the rest of the north side of town. And primarily, we're probably going to be looking along the Sacramento Avenue corridor. So we've done a lot of work in Washington, and so now we're starting to look at other areas of need.
And although I'm not supposed to testify, I feel like bring in between Louise and me the historical knowledge. You heard Mr. Alford mention that this is our first, current plan is our first consolidated plan. It is not the first time that we got CDBG money. Before that, before 2016, we were such a small city, we didn't get to determine how to spend our money. The state kind of said, this is how you're going to do it. So this 2016 to 2020 plan was the first time we got to choose. We hit the threshold of 50,000 residents. And a big topic of conversation at the time is, do we focus on one neighborhood, or do we kind of like fix this little problem here and that little problem over here? And the decision at the time was what Louise said, let's build up one place, then let's move down to the next place, and let's move down to the next place instead of patching holes in the inner tube. So I hope I got that all right, Louise. I don't have all the technical words for it.
Yeah, yes, that's a very good description, Chris, and much more concise than I was.
And what I particularly noticed in your presentation, Mr. Alford, is I see a shift in funding from what we have been doing, which is a lot of that infrastructure to help improve that neighborhood and make it more attractive to folks who are building affordable homes. And I see a shift more towards tackling some of our immediate problems with homelessness. Did I interpret that correctly?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, it's a combination of both. I would say, Madam Chair, certainly we would still be looking at the Washington neighborhood for any opportunities, but as Louise mentioned, we're expanding also beyond Washington. The recommendation for the first year of the new consolidated plan for the 2021 year is still funding for that E&F Street project that's in the Washington neighborhood, because as you noted, we have provided prior funding to that project, and we would like to see that being completed. So once that project is completed, we will more than likely move on and look at other opportunities to improve other areas of the city. There are certainly plenty that need assistance, but we do want to see this area and this specific project be finalized. As you noted, we need to try to be very strategic with our CDBG funding. We don't get a lot of funding compared to other larger cities, like say City of Sacramento, which gets millions of dollars in CDBG funding. Our CDBG allocation is generally around $450,000, $470,000 every year. So we really have to think strategically to make sure that that money goes into projects that can leverage additional funding, or that can help out with prior investment that the city has made.
Hi, this is Sunny Thornton. I hope it's an okay time to ask a new question. I'm brand new here, so I apologize if this is off of the topic. I noticed a couple slides back, one of the #1 goals was to address supportive services for persons experiencing homelessness. And so I was curious what type of supportive services those would include. Would that be something like mental health care services, rehab services, things like that?
That is completely correct. So the commissioners may be aware that last year, the city acquired one of the motels along West Capitol Avenue. the former Roadway Inn, as part of its response to the COVID pandemic to assist some of our most vulnerable residents in the city, but also as part of the city's ongoing efforts to deal with, the impacts of homelessness and the incidence of homelessness. We have a commitment to the state to use that site for an interim housing program for homeless for the next 5 years. And the program is not only providing the housing, but we're also providing the wraparound services that you've just mentioned. And that includes case management support, it includes mental health, it includes living skills, basic living skills. It includes anything to get them ready to be able to achieve a permanent housing alternative. That's the ultimate goal of the program. Our homeless coordinator and the new police division that deals with homelessness oversees that program, along with the service provider and the property manager. So that is an example of a way that we could use some of our CDBG funding to help support that program that we know that we will have to operate for the next 5 years. Another example would be the permanent supportive housing project that is also being built by Mercy Housing further down on West Capitol Avenue. That is an 85-unit project that is being developed and should be completed by the third quarter of this year. I believe September is the date that they are planning to complete that project. That is permanent housing, and they will also be providing supportive housing services, wraparound services to all of those homeless or prior homeless individuals that will be residing at that location. That could be a potential project that may need some assistance in the future. But there may be others, right? There may be other programs that come up that may need some of the assistance. And if it's something that we think that would be beneficial, some of the CDBG funding could be used for other programs. But those are two good examples of how CDBG funding could be used for supportive services to assist with homeless.
Much.
And commissioners and members of the public, if you have not driven by the location where the Mercy Housing Project is going in, it's across the street from Rayleigh's, kind of behind Kentucky Fried Chicken. And it actually takes up the entire block. So it's on Merkley, and it's also on West Capitol. It is going to be a really beautiful building, a lot of space there with a big courtyard. Please, and it replaced some really blighted, rundown multifamily housing and commercial businesses that were there. So next time you're at Rayleigh's, just drive around the block and take a look at that. It is a huge success story for the city of West Sacramento, and it is the type of project that this commission gives feedback on before the staff take it to city council.
Yeah, this is JP Singh. This is my first meeting too. And I was going through the agenda item and I reached out to have some question. The same Commissioner Kim pointed out about spending funds in the Washington district area. And then I had quite a bit detailed talk with Mr. Rowell. He explained me, my question was, we are spending the whole money of $483,000 just on the East E&F Street, the improvement, and that too into the Washington district area. So the answer I got from Mr. Rowell is that this is already, as per the study or as per the city council direction, the money has to be spent in that area, and it's already lined up to, and that in the presentation with Mr. Isaiah, we spent $766,000 last year on the same street, E&F, And this year, whole money going there too. So I don't know how we can accomplish our goal for homelessness and low-income housing and all that. We can twist the data, like it will help for them for busing or walking or everything. But to me, the whole money is being spent on just the infrastructure improvement, not directly for the homelessness or low income towards housing or treatment or some. So, but the bottom line comes, it is that the city council approved it and the grant money has to be spent there. And that's the direction we are taking as per city council to do those improvements. And then I'd like to know how much money we have spent in last 5-year plan up to 2020 in the grant money, how much we have spent and how much money we have in the pipeline for coming years. For example, for 2021, we have a 480,000, 20,000, what we are spending on improvement of E and F Street, and what's in the pipeline for 2022, 3, 4.
Isaiah, would you be able to go back to your slide where you discuss the prior year allocations? So we don't have an exact number of what the allocations for the next 4 years will be. That changes every year, depending on the allocations that Congress makes to the CDBG program. But they're generally about the same. Since the city became an entitlement jurisdiction, the city has received anywhere between 430,000, 450. I believe the most that we have received is the 2021, which is 470,000 in the allocation. But these are the funding allocations on the screen that we have done since we became an entitlement jurisdiction. So the very first year, CDBG funding was allocated to improvements on the North Riverwalk Trail and to make that trail accessible and connected to the Broderick boat ramp. The CDBG funding was specifically used for the design. And that project is scheduled to begin construction, I believe, by the end of this year. The following year, the 2017 allocation, if you can change your slide, Isaiah. The 2017 and 2018 allocations were to support that permanent supportive housing project that is currently being constructed by Mercy Housing. As Isaiah noted, just over $1 million of our funding allocations for the 2 years, 2017 and 2018, were used to support that project. And that's another way that we try to use the CDBG funding. This investment of just over $1 million in CDBG funds was key for Mercy Housing to leverage other funding from the state to make this project a possibility. This is I believe, about a $32 million project that received funding from the state, No Place Like Home, that received Section 8 vouchers from the Yolo County Housing Authority, and received low-income housing tax credits. The small amount of funding that we allocated to this project was a key component for Mercy Housing, again, to get awarded those additional funds, because those other funding sources always want to see that local jurisdictions are providing assistance. So this money, this little amount of money from CDBG, leveraged a lot of additional funding to actually make the project a reality. And then the 2019 and 2020 allocations, as we just noted, were directed to this E&F Street project. To complete the project, we don't have a final estimate yet on the construction, but we understand that it's probably going to be around $2.5 million to complete the improvements. So the funding that we have allocated so far has gone to the design of those improvements, and then part of it is going to be used to begin the construction. So any additional funding that we are able to allocate to this E&F Street project will go towards completion of those improvements.
So that means we're going to still have project left, about 2.8 million to complete E&F Street. The question is, how come in 17 and 18, we divert funds to the housing project on the West Capitol, not stay with the Washington district? Like I was under the impression that money can be spent only in Washington district area.
So the Washington district area was one of the goals in the current 5-year consolidated plan. It's one of our high priority goals, along with homelessness. So we try to allocate the money to further those top goals in our 5-year consolidated plan, the current one.
Well, it seems like for next, if we having it, for example, say average 400,000, and the project which you talk about, East Street, 2.8 million. So next, this 5-year plan is all committed to E&F Street. That's done. If you want to emphasis on that one, then nothing left for other goals that you shown in the slide for homelessness to low housing to mental illness and whatever. It is part of our goal is shot because we're going to spend all that money on the E&F Street.
Correct. Yeah, certainly for the 2021 allocation, that is true. The city is always looking at other funding sources to allocate to these types of projects. But depending on what the needs are and where those needs are is how we try to allocate the CDBG funds that we have on hand or that we are expecting to receive. The ideal situation is that we would be able to fund projects that go towards all of those goals. But the reality is that we do have limited funds. And as I noted before, we have to look at what the current needs are and try to be as strategic as possible when we're allocating those limited funds.
Raul, this is Louise. May I make a comment?
Yes, please go ahead.
So your point is well taken, Commissioner Singh. But as Raul said, we have more than one goal in our 5-year plan. Not all projects are ready for funding every single year. So we have a 5-year plan and we have 5-year goals, and then we get funding once every year. So we look at each year and say, okay, this year, what project is ready to move forward? Where do we need the money this year that's going to accomplish one of these goals? We kind of have a menu of goals. But one other, so the year that they put money into the permanent supportive housing project, that was acquisition money. They needed to purchase, they had needed the money up front for the purchase of the property where they wanted to build. Because, as Raul said, they went out and were able to leverage that $1 million into a $32 million project, mainly because they had site control on that property, which is always a key element of any kind of funding source for that type of project. That's always number one for that, for getting other money invested. The Washington infrastructure, they had to do the engineering and design. So we used money one year for that. And now we're getting ready to do the construction, and we're going to use probably 2 years of funding for the construction. But it's important to note that the city also has other funds available for some of these activities. We have various tax sales tax measures have been passed. Certain ones can be used for homeless issues. Certain funds can be used for economic development issues. So we try and see, okay, this year, within this framework of various funding sources and various needs this year, where does our CDBG fit? All within this 5-year, these 5-year goals. And also it should be noted that the city received extra CDBG funds last year through the CARES Act. So the home key project that Raul mentioned, the apartment motel that we purchased and is now housing homeless persons to keep them off the street and safe from COVID. That was a special allocation of CDBG money. So in addition to the $1 million that went into the permanent supportive housing units on West Cap down by Rayleigh's, we have these other units at the other end of West Cap. That was about $1.2 million in CDBG coronavirus funds. Raul?
Right. Yeah. No, thank you for bringing that up. I forgot to mention that as part of the CARES Act, the CDBG and like other programs received additional funding aside from the regular allocation. And the city received an additional $600,000, just over $600,000 in CDBG coronavirus funds for coronavirus related activities. It also happened that during that time, the city received payment of a loan and received additional program income of also around $600,000, almost $700,000. We used that money to support the acquisition of that motel on West Capitol Avenue for the home key program that is housing, I believe it's about 60, just over 60 individuals at that Roadway Inn, former Roadway Inn motel site.
Well, thanks for the information, but I'm just saying if we pick up 10 projects or whatever the amount numbers are, proportion-wise, we spend $1.5 million on the infrastructure, the E and F Street. But look at the return of your dollar. For $1 million, we can bring in the project $32 million on the housing project on the West Capitol. So overall, proportion-wise, we are putting a lot of money into the infrastructure that hinders our other goals or other projects, which I don't know how many you have picked up for these funds. We are lucky to get the $600,000 under the CARE program to get the roadway in. That's fine, but that's even out of the preview of regular funding we are getting for PPDG. So
yeah, this is Commissioner Guerra. Building on what Commissioner Singh was saying, it would be helpful since so many of us are newer members to this commission. I mean, it would be helpful to understand why the City Council sees this E&F Street infrastructure project as so critical. I understand, we started it, we got to finish it. And maybe there are, maybe this infrastructure is a barrier to, other investments that are going to come in. And once it's completed, maybe it'll be similar to the permanent housing project where we'll be able to leverage that into a lot more, dollars in the community. So, it maybe just a little bit of background as to what we think once this project is complete, what the bang for our buck is going to be from it.
Yeah, no, and I think Louise briefly touched on that. One of the reasons, obviously, is the fact that in order to attract development, we need to have the infrastructure in place. And that was a big part of what that Washington Realized study noted. The other is that the area is adjacent to 3 affordable housing developments. So it's supporting those affordable housing developments that are already there. one of the goals of the city and many of the cities is to create walkable communities, right? It's part of the entire regional plan. You can't have walkable communities if you don't have sidewalks. And that's the condition that both E and F Street are right now, at least that portion, that block that we are talking about. Both E and F Street serve those three affordable housing developments. If, say, people wanted to walk down to the river, they would have to walk down those streets without any sidewalks. So it's a combination of both. Again, I think it's a realization of what that Washington Realized study noted in terms of the needs for the neighborhood, the needs to attract further development, and some of the failing infrastructure that was currently there. The E and F Street improvements are also going to be building on other improvements that were done by the city about 3 years ago. So the improvements that were done were primarily along 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Street. After you get past 5th, those improvements stopped. And we are trying to build upon those additional improvements that were already done by the city a few years ago.
Yeah, thank you. That it's a lot better sell when you talk about, hey, we have, we've made investments and we've put up a lot of affordable housing in the general vicinity of ENF, and we got to make sure they have basic sewage and water, clean water, and working sewer systems, et cetera, versus, oh, we're spending all this money so they could take a walk to the river. So I mean, tell the whole story. I think it's important that we tell the whole story, and your explanation, just helped me with that. So thank you.
Sure.
Commissioner Olson or Vice Chair Olson, I saw you had your hand up.
Yes, Ms. White. Is this a project that's expected to be completed by the end of 2021?
No, I don't believe that it's expected to be completed by 2021. We're in the middle of the design phase. The environmental review is currently being conducted as well. One of the issues that we're running into or that may delay some of the construction is that this particular area has been noted as an area that may have what's the word I'm looking for? Not archaeological, but a lot of Native American artifacts. So part of the environmental study has to consider the impacts to any artifacts that may be in the area. And the entire Washington neighborhood, for that matter, is an area that is noted as a high, again, I'm a loss for words, but an area where there are several artifacts that have been found or could be found. So the environmental review process may slow down the actual construction because we need to make sure that the tribes are consulted. And if anything is found, they will have to monitor the construction to make sure that we comply with that environmental review. So, I don't anticipate the construction to be completed in 2021. No.
Okay, thank you. Is this project expected to use up a big chunk of the 2022 CDBG money as well?
That may be a possibility. It's going to depend on whether we're able to identify other sources of funding to complete the project. Again, we may come back and say we would like the commission to consider a full allocation or maybe just a partial allocation for the 2022 CDBG funds. I wouldn't be able to confirm right now whether that would be the case. But as I mentioned before, the city has other funding sources that we're always looking into to try to complete these projects. And especially if there's a desire for the commission to recommend that we look at other funding sources, that's what we will do to try to complete out the project.
Thank you.
Sorry, I don't know how to raise my hand on here. I was trying to do it. First of all, thank you for the presentation. I appreciate that. I kind of understand, I can see why that location is picked, the developments going on the riverfront and what the idea for that location is over the long term. Of course, you're going to have some sidewalks there. I can understand the return on investment you'll get from it. But at the same time, I kind of agreed with saying in the sense that it kind of falls on deaf ears in a little bit, for lack of a better term, considering what we were able to get out of those funds with the Mercy Project in the past. But I know, you can't apples to oranges there. My question is, in respect to the homelessness, it feels like a lot of the allocation has gone towards a reactive approach to it, as opposed to a proactive approach. I didn't even really see much of, the coronavirus and how that eviction moratorium has impacted, I'm sure, hundreds of properties within the city of West Sacramento. Do we have a plan for proactive approach to homelessness, I guess is my question.
So in terms of rental assistance, we don't have any direction at this time to look at our CDBG funding for that purpose. There are other funding sources that are coming through the pipeline from the state and the federal government that are able to be used for that purpose. So the direction that we received is that we need to focus our CDBG funds on other activities such as infrastructure improvement, supporting our other affordable housing developments that may be coming through the pipeline. So right now we don't have any plans to use some of that money for those types of activities. The other thing that I believe that Isaiah mentioned, but I do want to emphasize as well, in terms of services for either homelessness or youth activities or any other type of service, we would not be able to allocate the full amount of our CDBG funds. The CDBG program caps service activities at 15% of our total allocation. So we would only be looking at 15% of the total allocation in any given year to allocate to any type of service activity. And that would be, for example, case management that we mentioned earlier. That would be supportive services, youth programs, things of that nature.
But Mr. Rao, we spent 100% of the funding for the capital improvement. So how we can say with the 15% comes in place?
So that's for services, service activities. So again, so I'm talking about case management support. I'm talking about fair housing services to residents, youth programs. Those are considered services.
I understand that you have 5-6 services. Not a single dollar has been allocated in year 2021, because 480,000 or whatever that for East Street project, that eats up the 100% of the allocation of the funds. So where those goals going to be met that you just lined out 3-4 different types? That's kind of confusing. Maybe if you have all the study done and how many projects you have on the paper to execute with these funds. So maybe it will help us to kind of overview of the projects. One of them is West Capital Manor projects we are doing for 85 units. That's the only one I see out of the preview of this infrastructure we have spent so far since 2016. So this youth program and housing, blah, blah, nothing I see has spent in the past, or $2.8 million will eat up in the future direction that you are seeing. So the low housing people need a walking to the river. That requirement or that direction also apply onto the other project that you may have on the paper. So how we do this priority wise or proportion wise, we are spending the funds. I understand we need E&F street. That's great, but I still can't comprehend that whole amount of money is going just at one place, because there is no other need in the whole city that requires same attention.
Correct. Yes. And again, so the point that I was trying to make is that services are capped at 15%. We have chosen not to allocate any funding to services. Again, it's not a requirement, but it's only that if we decided to undertake a service activity, we would not be able to spend more than 15% of the allocation for that. But you're right. We are recommending, and we have in the past elected to fund other capital projects over funding services. We have not funded any type of service in the past.
Raul, may I make a comment?
Yes, go ahead, please.
As I mentioned before, the city does have other funding sources. So, for example, one of the services that the city provides, which is huge when it comes to to homelessness and families or individuals that are struggling and are at risk of losing their home, is our homeless coordinator, Mark Sawyer, working out of the police department. We don't use CDBG funds to pay for Mark Sawyer's salary. We use other types of city funds. I can't remember, Raul. Is it Measure In? It's
Measure
one
E.
of the Measure E
funds.
Thank you. So there are other sources. CDBG is one of the very few sources of federal funds that has a wide variety of uses. So people think of it as being very flexible, but it's very diverse, but it's not really very flexible. It comes with a lot of rules. It comes with a lot of reporting to HUD. It comes with a lot of requirements. So, for example, if we funded Mark Sawyer with CDBG funds or other homeless service providers, they would have to verify the income of the people that they're serving. And these are people living in tents along the river that may not have verifiable income, may not even have an ID card. That doesn't mean that it's not a good use of the funds. It doesn't mean it's not a good, a needed use of the funds. It just means that it's difficult and it comes with a lot of federal overhead. And so what we have tried to do in West Sac is put our CDBG funds into big projects that are already the type of projects that are going to meet all the federal requirements. We have the environmental review, as Raul mentioned, that's can be very complicated. Well, any city streets project is going to have that same federal environmental review requirement. So we didn't add any other cost to what we were already doing. The permanent supportive housing already had other affordable housing funds in there that were federal, such as the Section 8 vouchers. So we didn't add a lot of other layers of requirements or environmental requirements and other restrictions. They were already there. So that's what we've tried to do, is make sure that we we're selective with our CDBG funds so that they can go where they're best used and not cause a problem or a more expense with a project or program. And when we need funds that if we're doing some activity that doesn't already have federal funds in it, like the homeless coordinator position, let's use local funds where we have way more control and way less restrictions. As Raul mentioned, like in Sacramento, they're getting $5 million in CDBG funds every year. They do a lot more types of projects because they have huge amounts of money. We have a small amount of money and a small amount of, we try and keep the overhead small with that. And that's why we tend to throw it all into one big project here and there, but not all projects are ready every year. So we select the one that is most likely to be ready within that funding year. For example, the permanent supportive housing on West Capitol Avenue, golly gee, I worked on that before I retired 4 years ago. So it takes 5, 6, sometimes 7 years to get an affordable housing project off the ground. So we just try and make sure that the money is available when that project is ripe. Right now, what is ripe is we feel it's important to capitalize on the improvements that have been done in Washington and get some of those finished. And as Raul mentioned, this particular area is basically surrounded on all sides by affordable housing. So we are talking about if you did an assessment against these properties to pay for putting in sidewalks and such to make the streets safe for children walking to school, disabled persons getting across in a wheelchair to transit over to 5th Street or 3rd Street, you'd be putting an assessment on an affordable housing project. You'd be hurting the affordable housing project. So it's really, is it the absolute best use of the funds? Maybe there are other projects that are important, but they're not any that are really ready right now, or that we can capitalize on what we've already done. That's how we feel about this particular year's funding. We have 5 years in this consolidated plan. We have a lot more project to do, and as Isaiah's presentation noted, our goals over the 5 years are not to put all the money into infrastructure. Our goals are to address supportive services needs of persons experiencing homelessness, to create more of this low barrier housing, which is like the Mercy Housing Project on West Cap. It's for people that have been homeless and have, poor credit. They don't have much income. They may have substance abuse issues. Those kinds of things that a landlord won't rent to. So we're calling that low barrier to entry housing for these folks that have issues, so that we can get them into housing and work on those issues. We also have a goal for supporting our small businesses and preserving affordable housing stock. So we have some we set the bar fairly high for the next 5 years, but not all of those goals are going to be accomplished with CDBG funds. There's not enough money to go around. We have other funding sources, and we will look and be opportunistic to select which things get funded with CDBG and which things are better fit for other funding.
So, city team, I have a question that I'd like to clarify, and then I also want to make a recommendation. First, my question is on page 145 of the consolidated plan. It's table 55. In our board packet, it's page 160. There's a table there that lists 3 annual goals. And I can share. Yeah, I can share my screen if y'all want me to share, so you don't have to scroll through 160 pages. The Commission Clerk, I think you'll have to give me. Oh, we got it. All right. So here's the table, and this table is labeled annual goal and objectives, and it lists 3 goals here: the E&F improvement, but it also has the small businesses support and the fair housing services. So what I think I heard you say is that in the 2021 annual plan, which is just how you're going to spend the money this year of that 5-year plan, you are not going to do number 2 and 3. Is that correct?
No. So we're going to be doing in 2021 a micro enterprise program. That $60,000 is an allocation that we did in 2019.
Okay, so that's what we're carrying forward.
Correct, exactly.
Okay, so it's not like that thing's not going to be done. It's just that we already had funding allocated for that.
That is correct, yeah. And unfortunately, just about when we were to roll out a request for proposals to get consultants to do this micro enterprise program is when COVID hit last year, but a year from now. So unfortunately, we had to put that in the back burner while we were dealing with other, more pressing issues. But it is an activity that that was approved by the commission and by the council. So we do want to make sure that now that it seems like we are, doing better in terms of the pandemic, that we start this process so that we can try to have a program in place by sometime this summer.
Okay, and the fair housing services is also a roll forward from a previous allocation?
So the fair housing services has been paid from our general administration. So if you recall in the allocations, the 434 is the activity, and then we're able to take up to 20% of the total allocation for general administration services. And we pay the affirmative housing consultant out of that general admin allocation. So that's where that is being paid from.
So should that table, before this is presented to council to vote on, should that table be updated to indicate that that is not CDBG funds? Or is it CDBG funds that you paid into the general admin pool?
Correct. They are CDBG funds. Yes.
Okay. So that does answer one question. These services that we've talked about, the 15%, are being done in 2021.
So the micro enterprise program is, we didn't do it on the services necessarily, but it is certainly a service that we are doing to micro enterprises. This was an allocation that was done in 2019 that we are implementing in 2021.
Okay, and I do remember a long conversation about this. Like I said, y'all, this is not the only time we're going to talk about CDBG.
Chris, this is Louise. May I make a comment?
You bet.
I apologize for the length and the sometimes confusing way that this document is put together. It's actually a standard HUD form. It's a federal form. It has to flow this way. And certain sections, there's very limited characters that you can type in. So sometimes things are not overly clarified. So I do apologize for that. We did the best we can. Raul and Isaiah and I we've been working on this since December.
So,
but there are two sets of goals in the document before you. SP 45 goal summary, which is on page 127, has goals for the 5-year plan. Overarching goals for the 5-year plan. On my version, it's page 127.
Okay, I think it's a little different in our. Sorry, make everybody sick, car sick while I scroll.
So it's there you go. That's it. So those are the overarching 5-year goals. They do have an estimated funding amount in the next to last column. That is estimated. We don't know for sure how much CDBG funds. So for example, in the very first goal, we're not estimating to use CDBG funds on supportive services because we generally use local funds for those types of homeless services. And it works better. It's easier. It doesn't throw in a lot of extra staff time and costs for operations. But it's still one of the goals in this plan because this plan wants to show the city's commitment to addressing homelessness. Then the goals that you showed us, those 3 goals are for the coming fiscal year, the 2021 year. That's what we're going to do with our money this year. So there's 2 sets of goals. There's the goals there at SP 45 goal summary. And then there's the goals where you showed us before, which was the AP 20 annual goals.
Okay. Excellent. So I'm going to stop sharing because I like to see everybody's face instead of my big screen. We will have plenty of opportunities to weigh in on the 2022 plan. Plenty of opportunity. The other thing, and I would also say as a contractor to the Department of Energy, productivity of federal government is measured in how many pages your report can be. You know, never use one page if you can use 27. So I get that. The other city team is, I would also recommend, if you're not doing so already, there are 3 sources of transportation funding that could also either match the money or maybe supplement the money. The first, and I don't think the city has ever applied for CMAQ money, congestion mitigation and air quality money that comes through Caltrans. And CMAQ funding will come available this fall. And there is an emphasis on active transportation, and certainly pointing this about sidewalks that are not walkable, rollable, and a connection to transit could certainly get some CMAQ funding, and that can be a couple $1 million. I also know that in previous years, we have applied to SACOG for funding to help with our electric charging stations and with VIA and some other things. SACOG also loves active transportation, and I'm sure that Sarah got a plan in mind. The third is through the Air District, through the Air Resources Board, they have the AB 617 communities. And those are communities that are very low income and adversely affected by air quality. We have talked for a while about how the city might qualify for AB 617 designation. And that's going to come up later this year. And that would be totally a project to be funded with AB 617. So, y'all, I work in transportation. I know my transportation funding. So, you know, I would just encourage us to not just say, hey, our only way to do this is to look at as a housing problem or a blight problem, but how we also might look for additional funding as an active transportation problem. And the fact that those sidewalks are not ADA accessible just puts a gold star on it for government funding. So.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'll help you write those grants.
On the closing note, I just request Mr. Isaiah if he can email us the presentation that he did today. And also, if we can have a list of projects that's on we have to accomplish, whether we have a funding or not, if we can have those projects, a list of the projects. And the last thing is on this, I lost my thought. That's why.
So I also have some recommendations for the city staff from hearing all of the discussion. The first point that I think would be helpful, Isaiah, is if you could include the disclaimer that Luis mentioned on the presentation about how these are goals, but from the limited amount of funding, we're not going to be able to fund all of them, right? We're going to fund what is based on readiness, based on annual need base, and based on, so just being able to make that disclaimer, because I think all of us were under the assumption that we're going to try to do all 6 of these goals. And so I think that caused some conflict. So that's first recommendation. Second recommendation is to city staff and just to all of us to think about in general, is that this assumption that developers will not develop if there's no infrastructure, I don't think that is the case anymore. What we have seen is when cities upzone land, then developers, even with no infrastructure, they'll pay for all the infrastructure. If the entitled land is upzoned, then there's much more of an appetite to now pay for infrastructure, whereas maybe a decade ago, they wouldn't have done that. We've seen this in Sacramento. Developers are paying private funding to pay their own infrastructure because it's zoned right. So that is something to keep in mind. The third piece is to Raul about DJ's point about what can we do proactively for homelessness? And I wanted to talk about next time how maybe if there's an affordable housing trust fund, because I believe in West Sac there is an affordable housing trust fund, maybe how some of that funding could be used to address homelessness services, especially proactiveness to help people stay in their homes, especially if they're on the brink. And then the last thought and recommendation is about the new goal for 2021, 2025. I'm going to comment on what Chairperson White said, that the biggest shift from the last 5 years and this new 5 years is that it's moving away from infrastructure into services. I'm actually concerned about that because my understanding of CDBG fund is that it's about capacity building, not on direct services. Because like you mentioned, Luis and Raul, there's so many other programs that should be focusing their money on direct services. So for me, any money going into direct services actually seems like not necessarily the best use of CDBG funds. So my question is, how can we make sure, even though because the political climate is that it should go into homelessness, and I totally agree, but how can we make sure that when it goes into homelessness, that it could achieve what you achieved with the Mercy Housing Project, leverage, where you can take $1 million of homelessness, well, 15%, but how that 15% could be leveraged in a way where it's actually going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars going into services. Or number two, sustainability. Because like the problem with direct services, it's like one time it's done. How can we make sure that we're using that funds to hire more grant writers or creating programs that's leveraging private funding so that these programs can exist beyond? Thank you.
Thank you.
Other comments from commissioners?
This is JP. Just the last question I was forgot before. To Luis, is there any proposal or project in works? Like you said, the West Capital project takes 4 years to be in making. So are you working on any project that will take shape in coming 3-4 years in comparable to the project on West Capitol Avenue?
Commissioner Singh, I can try to address that question. So nothing on West Capitol Avenue. The city is currently working with Jamboree Housing on phase 2 of West Gateway Place. That is, if the council is familiar with Tower Bridge Gateway, it's right at the corner of Tower Bridge Gateway and Grand Street. The first phase was completed back in 2016, I believe, 2017. And we are currently working with that developer, that same developer, to complete the phase 2 project. So we're currently in the design phase. We're also in the process of finding additional funding for the project itself. The city has already committed, not CDBG funds, but they have committed other federal funding that the city has, which is called Home Investment Partnerships Program. So we have committed 1.4 million of that home program income. And we have also committed 1.3 million of our Housing Trust Fund funds to that project. So we have a total commitment right now of about 2.7 million for that affordable housing development. And that's going to be a 60-unit family project that will also include 6 units of permanent supportive housing units for families. So that is one way, as Commissioner Kim asked, how the Housing Trust Fund program is used as well. Some of the funding that went to the Mercy Housing for that permanent supportive housing project also came from the Housing Trust Fund. So that's the only active project that we have right now. In terms of affordable housing development, that's the only active one that we have. And most of our limited funds have been committed to make sure that that project goes vertical. As we all know, funding is a challenge. There's a lot of competition, and it takes several years for these types of projects to come to fruition. I hope that answered the question.
Thanks.
Commission Clerk, do we have any comments that were submitted by the public on this item?
We do not.
All right, unless there are further comments from commissioners, I think we are ready for a motion. And to be clear, we as commissioners do not adopt these. What we do is refer that it be passed on to City Council, and City Council is the decision-making authority. We just say it's ready to go or it's not ready to go. So and staff recommends that we recommend the 2021 to 2025 consolidated plan and the draft 2021 plan that we just discussed, that we recommend that they take it to City Council for approval. Do I have a motion? And please remember to say your name when you make a motion.
This is Andrew. I motion.
And a second?
This is Commissioner Guerra. I second.
Thank you. And Commissioner Clerk, can you do a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Dawson?
Oh, I vote yes.
Commissioner Guerra?
Yes.
Commissioner Kim?
Yes.
Commissioner Olson?
Yes.
Commissioner Singh?
Yes.
Commissioner Thornton?
Yes.
And Commissioner White?
Yes.
Thank you.
Right, the motion passed. And just so y'all know, our old city clerk used to mix it up sometimes and go in reverse alphabetical order. So you have to be ready. All right, we are moving on to our final item for where we have to move and vote. And that is the very last page of your packet. And it's our meeting dates for 2021. Any discussion that one of those dates is like on a major holiday that we missed or is in conflict with some other thing that happens. We did one time accidentally pick a holiday, so it's good to review. All right, do I have a motion to adopt this resolution, which is our future meeting dates?
Commissioner Olson, I move to adopt.
And a second?
Commissioner Thornton, I second.
And our roll call vote, please. We don't roll call vote when we're in person. Just telling you.
Thank you. Commissioner Dawson?
Yes.
Commissioner Guerra?
Yes.
Commissioner Kim?
Yes.
Commissioner Olson?
Yes.
Commissioner Singh?
Yes.
Commissioner Thornton?
Yes.
Commissioner White?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, we are on to our last little item of business, and this is any requests or comments from the commissioners.
I have a quick question. In going through the PDF of the agenda packet, is there any way to make it a searchable document? So if I was looking for, trying to search a certain word, I could type that in the search engine, because right now it doesn't have that ability.
We could definitely do that for future meetings for sure.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
So this is slightly after the fact, but so just to clarify, our meetings are only just every other month. Okay.
For the most part, sometimes there is an emergency meeting where something comes up and they need public input very quickly. At the end of last year, we were reviewing the new housing element for the general plan. And so we did have more frequent meetings because we had pressing work before the commission. Oh, and all of the meeting materials plus this recording, y'all, are posted on the website. So you will have, you and every other member of the public will be able to see the presentation, and you can share your comments and concerns with your friends on Facebook, and they can watch you on the recording.
I did have one more thing real quick. As I'm looking at the map, that ENF Street project, I'm seeing it's looks kind of like just an empty lot. Is that somebody's property? Is there a plan with that lot for development? Or are we just kind of doing it for the hopes that somebody's going to come in and do something with it? Is the city taking ownership of that in some respect, or what's the goal with that?
Commissioner White, can I answer that question?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so the lot is privately owned. It's been vacant for, I was talking to Commissioner Singh earlier today, but that lot has been vacant for at least the last 10, maybe 15 years. It used to be an old mobile home park that was closed down many, many years ago. I know that it's been for sale for many years as well, without much success. Commissioner Singh mentioned that it seemed like somebody was doing some type of work on the site itself, but I'm not aware that it has transferred ownership. It used to be owned by the Jensen family, I believe. But again, it's not a site that the city is looking to acquire, at least at the present time. I believe the city may have inquired about that in the past, but you know, the asking price was just not feasible for the city.
Sure.
So I'm not aware of any development that is being proposed currently on that site. But you know, things are changing, and that could certainly change in the future.
Yeah, it's definitely prime location. Like I mentioned before, I could see why this has become a priority for the allocation of funds. Thank you.
Certainly.
So city staff, any idea of when we will be able to meet in person again, since we're now in the orange tier?
No, unfortunately not. We have not received any updated information on when you know, City Hall may reopen, and when commission meetings and council meetings will resume in person. I'm sure you know, city manager and his staff are looking at how the progress continues. We seem to be moving along the tiers, but you know, we have that happen where we move into a lower tier, and then something happens where we're bounced back into a more restrictive one. So we have not received any indication that City Hall is going to be opening anytime soon. I'm sure it'll happen eventually, but really don't have an idea at this point how soon that will be. And the same goes for commission meetings and city council meetings, obviously.
A question for our chair, Chairwoman White, on how the commission could kind of divvy up prep work. Because, like, first of all, I applaud you for getting to page 150 because, like, honestly, after page 10, I was like, I need alcohol. Like, I don't know if I'm going to get past page 10. It's like, give me a tequila shot. And so I was just like, I wanted to read it. I really did. I wanted to like come all prepared, but I was just like, after page 10, I was really struggling. And so I was wondering if in the future, like for the May meeting, if we do get like a 200-page document, if we can like divvy it up, like you read page 10 to 20, you read from 20 to 40, and then all of us can like, it's much more manageable versus.
That is an awesome idea, but then it becomes a serial meeting where we've actually met outside of the public purview. If we even agree, like in advance, to divvy something up, it is no longer a public meeting because we have discussed commission business without the public being present. So I will tell you, my first year on the commission, I didn't read this thing. I read like the executive summary and went, whoa. And so I think it's a little bit of practice in knowing where things are in the document. I do find particularly with these federal documents, and we don't get a lot of these. We don't get a lot of these this size, but you know, running through the tables, looking at the headers, don't read every word. Commissioner Olson has also been on the commission for a couple of years now, so he had his big, oh my God, 190-page document moment too. 3 days, read 190 pages. So Daniel, I don't know, what have you found works for you?
This is Commissioner Olson. I think that our first meeting in 2019 was going over the 5-year plan and any updates to it. And it was very dense. And it took me a day and a half because I had to Google half of the terms in it. Most of the agendas after this are much less dense. And then within kind of that first 10 pages of what it is they want to talk about and what their plans are, they usually reference different points and appendixes. And so I find that I can skip through the documents and it only takes me a few hours to get through everything now, but it still takes a while.
It does. And I have found typos in the past, so.
Madam Chair, can I add something?
Yes, please.
So, we certainly understand that, sending a 200-page document just days before a commission meeting or a council meeting is not the ideal situation. We do try to send them out as earliest as we can, but it's unfortunately not always possible. I believe that we did send the draft for this 5-year consolidated plan before the agenda went out to give you a day or two more. But we were also working on the 5-year consolidated plan up to Tuesday, and most of it was being done by Luis, our consultant, and both Isaiah and I were reviewing the document as well. But we do try to be mindful of the fact that we are sending you 100-page, 200-page documents, so we will do our best to try to get those documents out to you with a little bit more lead time to give you an opportunity to try to dive into them. But also understand that it's difficult as well because we're also working on these at the very last minute.
And for these great big reports, we aren't actually the intended audience. They are writing this for somebody whose job at HUD it is to review this document. And so sometimes it doesn't have the background or the level of detail. And Mr. Huerta mentioned that JP called him and asked him a few questions. And so I am not gonna suggest that all of us call the staff all the time, but there are resources at City Hall. And that's a little part of having some institutional knowledge of commissioners like Daniel and I that have been around is we know some of those things. So, but we're all going to come up with issues that we've never had to address before, and we're going to have to figure it out. And that's the value to the city staff of this commission is we are the voice of the public. And if it's not clear to us, it helps them understand how to explain things better. And I think you all did a great job of that tonight. You asked really smart questions and you helped shape answers. So that's just what we're supposed to be doing. So good job, everybody. All right, with that, let's finish up with any staff updates.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in the interest of time, I'll keep my updates very, very short. But I did want to just provide a quick update to the Commission on 3 of our affordable housing projects that we're currently working on. We already discussed some of these in the CDBG discussion. One of them is the Mercy Housing Permanent Supportive Housing Project. I believe I mentioned earlier that the project is on schedule. Fortunately, the project has not seen much or any delays due to the COVID pandemic. They are scheduled to complete construction in the 3rd quarter of this year, around September, and hope to have full occupancy, within a month or 2 at most. They are currently working with our homeless service provider, Mark Sawyer, and the county to make sure that they have a mechanism in place to make referrals for those units. Because it is a permanent supportive housing project, it's not your typical application process to be able to live there. They have to go through a referral from the county's continuum of care. and Yolo County Housing and our homeless coordinator. So that process is currently being developed right now to make sure that everything is in place when that project is ready to accept residents. The other project that I wanted to mention was the Home Key program at the Roadway Inn that we also briefly discussed. As I mentioned earlier, the city acquired the Roadway Inn Motel back in December of last year as a response to the COVID pandemic. We used some of our CDBG funding, approximately 1.2 million of CDBG funds, coronavirus funds for the acquisition of that site. In addition to state home key funds, a Yolo County care sub award, and some of our Measure E funds for that program. We currently have our service agreements in place for the supportive services that are being provided to the program participants. They're getting case management support. Meals are currently being distributed to those program participants. And there is some laundry that is being done for them as well. And the reason that we're doing that is because most of the placements at that site were individuals that had medical conditions that made him even more vulnerable to the pandemic, and elderly individuals. That's how our homeless coordinator decided to make those placements there, and that's why we decided that it would be ideal to maintain those individuals at that site. The city is going to be operating that interim housing program for at least a 5-year period. And after that time, as long as we have identified additional affordable housing units to replace those 40 units, then the program can cease operations. But the goal of the program is, again, not to be a permanent housing at that site. The goal is to get those individuals ready to be transitioned into, say, the Mercy Housing Permanent Supportive Housing project, or other permanent housing alternatives in the city or throughout the county. And the last project that I briefly wanted to mention was, again, our phase 2 of West Gateway Place. The staff continues to actively work with the developer, Jamboree Housing, on the development of that project, which again is adjacent to the phase 1 project at the corner of Tower Bridge Gateway and Grand Street. We're going through the securing the financing for the development and some of the offsite improvements. The city has committed approximately 2.7 million to that project in home program income funds and housing trust funds. So that concludes my updates. And again, as we move forward, we will try to have more updates for the commission on some of the other projects that we have working on or have in the pipeline. Thank you.
Thank you. And I saw on our meeting notes, that might have been minutes from the last one, that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, there are still no city events planned in the calendar currently, correct? Yeah.
I believe that's the case, correct.
All right. So with that, I appreciate everybody's time and attention. Staff, thank you for being with us for so long. Louise, it was lovely to see you again. And I look forward to maybe seeing you all in person in May, or maybe back on Zoom again. And with that, our meeting is adjourned. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you.